Good afternoon, dignitaries, High Commissioner of India to Singapore, Mr. Kumaran, distinguished panelists and industry leaders from India and Singapore. It gives us a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon to discover the new pathways for wonderful relationship that Singapore and India enjoys over the last more than a few hundred years, I would say, and in the modern history since Singapore became an independent country. As we speak against the backdrop of a very difficult geopolitical environment, complicated with something that all of us are battling in different ways, shapes, and forms of COVID, I'm reminded of a very beautiful poem that Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore wrote. It's not the Gitanjali, but an equally potent and small poem, which gives us tremendous courage to look at the future. In fact, the name of the poem is A Prayer for Courage. And I would only read a few lines to sort of draw the setting for our conversations. And he says in the first line, "Let me not pray to be sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless in facing them. Let me not beg for the stilling of my pain, but for the heart to conquer it." So I think these four lines summarize the battle that we are facing today, both as individuals, families, as industries, as companies, as businesses, and as countries and nations. I think we need a great deal of courage. I was requested to give a few opening remarks, and all I can say is today we are amongst friends between Singapore and India. As you will see in our panelists, most of us wear the India and Singapore hats with equal ease, which is actually a remarkable example of the intimacy and trust that Singapore and India have developed over the last about 5.5 decades or so. The founding prime minister, I heard his speech once, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said that we are immensely grateful to India because India managed to Asianize the English law, and Singapore's entire legal framework was developed on the Indian legal system. And he also quipped by saying, it's only that we implement it much more strongly, even the sections are the same. And as a great lawyer himself, that was a huge compliment of trust to look at something that India did, and they've always had that kind of intimacy. All I can say in reflection is the last 5 decades have strengthened the relationship on all fronts between India and Singapore. And economic is only one dimension of that relationship that we should not forget. It's a very strong people relationship, a strong history of cultural and social engagement between countries. On the defense side, it's been a remarkable and unique system where actually the Singapore Armed Forces have continuously trained over 5 decades in India. In their military training, many of the older generals were those who went to the army colleges in India. Not many countries can boast that kind of relationship. On political level, I think it's been a wonderful engagement of trust over the years, and it has only gotten more and more intimate with actually the two prime ministers speaking to each other in April when COVID hit us. We had some issues. And they resolved to say that, look, in the post COVID world, what we need is friends who think alike. And with the kind of intimacy and cooperation we have, we must impact not just ourselves, but bring stability to a fractured sort of global environment. So it's beautiful to actually note that just not a very close bilateral engagement, but within the bilateral engagement, both sides believe very strongly in a good global trading order, global world order, and multilateralism. So those common beliefs can show new pathways for us to look at the future. And coming to economics and area of business, I think the SECA has benefited quite substantially from both sides. I wouldn't go into the details. It has been a beautiful run. when the two prime ministers met in Singapore, they sort of announced that beyond SECA, what we need to look at is a strategic engagement and a strategic partnership. Now, when we look at strategic partnership among friends, it is not confined to any four walls, so it can go way beyond. And to just conclude my opening remarks, all I would say is it just does not have to follow the old index of how much investment or how much trade has improved, but it goes all over, touching various nodes of possible cooperation, which can extend into capability development of people, about technology development, impacting the world, and with new things that are coming together, scaling up what Singapore does with India. So there are a whole lot of areas where technology capabilities can play beyond a conventional way of looking at only investment and trade alone, which have indeed done too well. And unfortunately, due to our current situation, but the tourism between Singapore and India has been exceptional. The number of companies that have come into Singapore as Indian companies in their journey of globalization has been remarkable over the last few years, and it's only going to increase with a new set of M&A opportunities coming up in the post-COVID world. And most importantly, I think we need to focus also on innovations that are coming in the biomedical sciences, pharmaceuticals, and areas where we can help not just saving lives, but also improving and managing the livelihoods of people, which has become a central challenge to every nation. Now, with that, few opening remarks. I would take the opportunity to very warmly welcome amongst us His Excellency, the High Commissioner of India to Singapore, Mr. Kumaran. We're extremely happy to have you on board today. And it is perhaps our honor and privilege to host you perhaps in your first public event after taking charge of Singapore as the High Commissioner. I would not be doing justice if I did not give some highlights of his career and his background. Mr. Kumaran is an engineer from the IIT of India, and he joined the Foreign Service in the year 1992. He has worked in his way up in the service. He was in Egypt in the Embassy of India in Cairo from 94 to 97. He worked in Tripoli from 97 to 2000. And then he was First Secretary, Embassy of India in Brussels from 2000 to 2003, and Deputy Secretary of EWC Europe 1 Division in the Ministry of External Affairs from 2003 and 2005. He also was the Regional Passport Officer for Bangalore till June 2007, and he served in the Indian High Commission in Islamabad as Counselor from 2007 to 2009, and Counselor in the Embassy of India in Washington from October 2009 to August 2011, and Deputy High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka from 2011 to 2014. He was Joint Secretary, Consular and Passport Visa Divisions in headquarters in July 2014 to September 16, and he served as India's ambassador to Qatar in 2016 till he came here in 2000. He's just joined Singapore. I have to mention that he has had such a brilliant diplomatic career across very important and difficult touch points around the world, which are strategically very essential to India's relationships with the external world. And I'm sure his tenure will lift the India-Singapore relationship to a new high. And I would be failing if I did not share. He did the stupendous task of moving 50,000 Indians back to India just before he came here as the ambassador at Qatar. And it is all over. If you go in the social media, his short clips, he's been a very self-effacing personality, but the kind of work he has done to impact so many people's lives wanted to get back, including pregnant women. I saw an interview in which he spoke. So we're very privileged to have you, Mr. Kumaran, and I welcome you to please give your opening address in terms of how you see this relationship flowering and what your first impressions are in Singapore. And over to you, Mr. Kumaran. You may have to unmute your.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rao, Chairman, CII India Business Forum and Resident Director, Tata Sons for ASEAN. Distinguished panelists, Mr. Manohar Kiatani, Mr. Amit Sinha, Mr. Sanjeev Das Gupta, and Mr. Omar Shazad, and also other colleagues, Ms. Gargi and Mr. Jayesh. It's indeed a pleasure to join you today for this country session of the India-ASEAN Oceanic Business Meet and Expo. Let me start by thanking CII for extending me an invitation at this Singapore session of the first ASEAN-India Oceanic Business Summit, happening virtually today, given the challenges posed by COVID-19. Let me start by wishing you safety wherever you are in dealing with this unprecedented pandemic during our lifetimes. This program, as Mr. Rao mentioned, is my first official engagement in Singapore with the business community too, and I look forward to working with all of you in the days to come with the common aim of strengthening India-Singapore economic relations and commercial relations. Please note that I'm still High Commissioner Designate until I formally present my credentials, which is the reason why I could not join you for the main opening session on 4th or the discussions on 5th. Again, it's a great honor to be here. We've already had 2 full days of deliberations on various subjects. This country session on Singapore, I'm sure, will add further value to those discussions as these parallel sessions eventually feed into the overall conclusions of the business summit. As you all know, the close ties between India and Singapore have a history rooted in strong commercial, cultural, and people-to-people links across many centuries. The course of India's centuries-old route to Southeast Asia ran through Singapore. The human link is deep and enduring and continues to live on through the Singaporean Indians. On the foundations of this extraordinary heritage, the wealth of our human links and the strength of our shared values, India and Singapore are building a contemporary partnership. It is a relationship that truly meets the test of a strategic partnership. When India opened up to the world and turned to the east, Singapore became a partner and a bridge between India and ASEAN. Political relations between our countries are the warmest and the closest. There are no contests or claims or doubts that complicate the relationship. Our relations are based on shared values and vision, common approaches to economic opportunities, and convergence of interests on key issues. Political engagement has been regular, defense relations are strong, economic and technological ties are extensive and growing. Cultural and human links continue to be very vibrant. There is great convergence on a broad range of international issues, and we work together closely in a number of forums, including the East Asia Summit, G20, Commonwealth, IORA, and IONS. Agreements concluded between India and Singapore reflect the growing overall cooperation, which provides a larger institutional framework for activities between the two governments, in addition to commercial and people-to-people exchanges. The India-Singapore partnership is at the forefront of India's global engagement. Singapore has been both a leading investment source and destination for India. Singapore was indeed the first country with which we signed a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. Before COVID struck, we had nearly 250 flights in each direction every week, connecting Singapore with 16 Indian cities. India is the third largest source of tourists in Singapore and its fastest growing one. Our IT companies are helping Singapore stay smart and competitive. In many areas of India's development priorities, Singapore is a key partner, be it smart cities, urban solutions, financial sector, skills development, ports, logistics, aviation and industrial parks, or water management. It is not a coincidence that Singapore is India's largest trade partner in ASEAN. It is, as I just mentioned, a leading source of FDI, among the largest sources of external commercial borrowings and foreign portfolio investment. Bilateral trade expanded after the conclusion of CECA from US $6.7 billion in 2004-05 to nearly 28 billion in 2018-19. In 2019-20, our bilateral trade was just under 24 billion. Although there has been a decline due to the disruptions caused by COVID-19, I have no doubt that our trade will bounce back with greater vigor. More than 80% of our listed offshore bonds by Indian issuers are listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. Singapore is also a popular destination for issue of rupee-denominated masala bonds. Singapore-based investors have assets under management worth scores of billions of dollars. Temasek invested 400 million in the National Infrastructure Investment Fund, NIIF, in India in 2018, following the announcement made during the Indian Prime Minister's 2018 visit to Singapore. GIC, too, has made investments in infrastructure, telecom, and power sectors. Several Singaporean companies operate in India in the areas of real estate development, urban planning and solutions, housing, water and utilities, office space, power, and green energy. Over the years, India and Singapore have contributed to each other's prosperity. India offers strategic economic depth to Singapore, given the complementarities in our economies. Our partnership has the potential to help both sides stay ahead of the curve in the coming years. Cooperation in the areas of technology, innovation, fintech, and startups have grown, and I feel that these are areas in which India-Singapore relations are bound to grow significantly in the future. The sectors which have the greatest potential are fintech, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence and blockchain, healthcare and medical technology, agri-tech, satellite, and communication technology. We have an India-Singapore entrepreneurship bridge, Inspreneur, through which we try to connect the startup ecosystems of the two sides. Inspreneur already has had 3 successful editions. Similarly, ESG has set up the Global Innovation Alliance in 2019 and has expanded this network to Bangalore. The BHIM UPI QR-based payment system has gone live in Singapore, and technical arrangements have also been worked out for acceptance of the RuPay domestic card in Singapore, in addition to the RuPay international card, which was launched in June 2018 during the visit of the Prime Minister of India to Singapore. We are also exploring opportunities for creating a real-time, fast, secure, and efficient remittance channel between Singapore and India. Our youth represent the potential to take our partnership forward. 120 university students from India and Singapore, grouped into 20 teams, participated in the second joint hackathon held in Chennai in September 2019 to develop solutions to challenges in education, healthcare, and green energy over 36 hours. ISRO launched Singapore's first indigenously built microsatellite in 2011, followed by 2 more in 2014 and 6 in 2015. During our Prime Minister's visit to Singapore in June 2018, 6 MOUs were concluded by NTU for research and exchange partnership with NITI Aayog in the area of artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognitive computing, and big data analytics to improve healthcare, cybersecurity, automation, mobility, smart energy systems, and e-governance. Joint PhDs and research programs with IIT Mumbai and Madras, IIC Bengaluru, and joint space research with the Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology has been going on with NTU. An endowment was also established for Indian research scholars coming to Singapore. As both India and Singapore navigate the COVID-19 pandemic and seek to emerge stronger together, we can look at more areas of partnership such as agriculture and food processing, ports and logistics, emerging technologies including space tech, gaming, as well as co-creating technologies and building resilient supply chains, spurring growth and development. I'm also aware that several dimensions of economic cooperation would require us to relook various options for imparting a fresh impotence in a post-COVID world order for our economies. The impact of the pandemic on the lives and livelihoods of our people is tremendous. The economic shock has been difficult, but as we walk the path to recovery, we do so with grit, confidence, and with friends. Singapore is indeed such an all-weather friend. I would like to again thank CII and the organizing team, including Mr. K.V. Rao, for the opportunity to talk to you. I look forward to interacting with you all individually and collectively in the days to come. I know High Commissioner Javed was an excellent extempore speaker and he leaves very large shoes for me to fill in, but I hope to do my best to try and pick up from where he left and take our relationship to greater heights in the future. Thank you very much once again, and it's a pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. That was absolutely, I would imagine, about 8 minutes. You covered the entire canvas of the relationship in terms of its past, present, and indications of the future. It shows the kind of person of detail you are and action. And we're very privileged to listen to you. And you provide a fantastic background for the conversation with the panelists. And we have a very capable and diversely talented panelists who come from different sectors. And as I had begun in the beginning, I commented and said, most of us here do wear both hats with equal ease. And with that, request Gargi to introduce the panelists to us, and we'll start the panel discussion. Thank you very much, High Commissioner. And I request you to kindly stay on.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for the country session today. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce the distinguished panelists who all have vested interests and deep connection with India. I very, very briefly also want to reintroduce our moderator, just because he wears various hats, and I want to point out a few of them. Apart from being the resident director, ASEAN of Tata Sons, as High Commissioner mentioned, he's the chairman of CI India Business Forum. Very important to note for us. He's also the vice president of the executive committee of SINDA, which is Singapore Indian Development Association, the vice chairman of South Asia Business Council of the Singapore Business Federation, member of the panel of advisors of SICI, which is the Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, president of Singapore Indian Fine Arts Society. So that's a lot. Moving on to our panelist, Mr. Manohar Kiatani. He is the Senior Executive Director, CapitaLand Group, who is wearing his Economic Development Board Singapore hat today as the advisor to chairman. CapitaLand Group is one of Asia's largest diversified real estate groups with presence across more than 200 cities in about 30 countries with assets under management exceeding $90 billion. Prior to joining CapitaLand, Mr. Kiatani was the Deputy Group CEO of Ascenda Sinbridge, CEO of JTC Corporation, and also served as Deputy Managing Director at the Singapore Economic Development Board. He sits on various boards as well as business and government committees, including Singapore Business Federation's South Asia Business Group. Moving on to our next panelist, Mr. Amit Sinha. He's the Managing Director and Global Head of Telecom, Media and India at DBS Bank, responsible for TMT client origination, execution activities across various products, which include structured finance, debt capital markets, equity capital markets, M&A advisory, and transaction banking. He was earlier GM and Senior Executive Officer of DBS Dubai, a senior banker in DBS Bank's regional TMT team in Singapore, and he also spent 5 years at Reliance Industries. Our next panelist is Mr. Sanjeev Das Gupta, who's the Executive Director and CEO of Ascendas India Trust. He has vast experience in the areas of real estate, fund management, corporate finance, strategy, and financial control. Prior to joining Ascendas, he was working as president of real estate at ICICI Venture Funds Management, and prior to that, he was managing director at Future Capital Real Estate. He has led several landmark investments in metros such as Mumbai and Bangalore and in high-growth Tier 2 cities. His prior work experience included stints with organizations such as Tata Group and Merrill Lynch across India, Hong Kong, and London. Now, our next panelist is Mr. Omar Shazad, who is the Group CEO of Manohar Group and oversees the performance of global group of nearly 5,000 employees across 51 offices and a particular focus on client management, business expansion, diversification, especially smart cities and digitization. He's currently the Singapore chairman of the ASEAN Young Entrepreneurs Council and member of SBF Built Environment Subcommittee. He also serves on the Build SG Advisory and Tripartite committees set up by Building Construction Authority of Singapore to advise and help steer the nation's construction industry transformation map. Prior to joining Manohar, he was extensively involved in the banking industry. Our next panelist is Mr. Anupam Varma, who is the Chief Executive of ICICI Bank Singapore and head for Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. He started his career as a management graduate with ICICI in 1999, moving on to corporate banking and later worked in international banking as a business head of international financial institutions. In his role, he managed bank's business with 500 financial institutions across 60 countries. During his tenure, ICICI Bank was awarded the best borrower in India by Finance Asia 3 years in a row. In his current capacity as the chief executive, he is responsible for developing and driving the bank's strategy for sustainable and profitable growth in the region. Once again, a big thank you to all the panelists for joining us today. Over to you, Mr. Rao.
Thank you very much, Gagi, for the lovely introduction. Basically, we're amongst friends as panelists because we all have a certain intimacy amongst ourselves. I'll keep it relatively informal to keep the discussion going in a manner where we can help to discover a joint future. And may I request Mr. Manohar Kiatani to start off, because he has had this very multidimensional experience of being a policymaker, an investor, an historian with a deep understanding of India, and now he's doing the job of being an advisor to the Economic Development Board's chairman. So his thoughts and his knowledge and his experience and insights are extremely valuable. I'll request you to please share some of your reflections on the relationship so far and what it holds for us in terms of our future. Over to you. You could, each speaker, I would request you to keep to 6 to 7 minutes, and then we will do a little bit of a debate or a discussion amongst ourselves with closing remarks. So that would be the structure of the conversation today. Over to you, Mr. Mano.
Hi, KV. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you so much for organizing this event. We are not going to allow a pesky virus to disturb the great relationship between Singapore and India. So I mean, hearing KV talk and High Commissioner talk. High Commissioner, welcome to Singapore. We have not met yet, but I'm sure we've spent a lot of time together. It looks like we are like a couple in love who is finding new things to do. So I think we are in a great place. First, I must say that Singapore and many of its businesses are very optimistic about India's long-term prospects. And I say that with a lot of confidence and some credibility because the company that I work for, in addition to my role as a special advisor to the EDB, that's CapitaLand, is amongst the biggest Singapore investors in India. We have been in India for more than 25 years. We started life there as partners with Tata, and we have continued to grow continuously since then. Our assets under management in India amounts to about 3.3 billion Singapore dollars, and we plan to double our investments in India over the next 5 years. And we have stated that publicly. And COVID may slow down our plans a little, but I'm convinced that it will not derail them. We develop IT parks and logistics properties and believe that these will continue to be in demand in India. And we are also looking out for opportunities in areas such as data centers and so. So the combination of the quality, quantity, and cost of IT talent in India is second to none. So we are confident of the continued growth of this segment. As for logistics, the growth of the manufacturing sector and e-commerce, as well as the move towards having more regional warehouses facilitated by the GST regime, will drive that. My colleague Sanjeev, who is also on this panel, will be sharing more details when he talks about Ascenders India Trust. Now, I will not say that investing in India is a walk in the park, but definitely it is manageable. And most importantly, things have been improving by quite a bit. You need lots of patience. So once in a while, you have to remind yourself of this filmy dialogue. Bhagwan ke ghar mein der hai, andher nahi. So translated, it means in the house of the Lord, there can be delay, but never darkness. So Singapore, in fact, was the top investor in India in FY 2019 with a value of above US 16 billion, which is more than 1/3 of total FDI in India. And over the last 20 years, Singapore has accounted for about 20% of total inflows into India. This clearly shows that Singapore believes in the India growth story. While we have made very good progress, I think even more Singapore companies should look at India, and both our government agencies and business associations are making a lot of effort to demystify India, and companies like CapitaLand gladly share our experiences. Now, coming to the other direction, Indian companies form the largest overseas contingent that have invested in Singapore. Many of these companies have set up their regional or even global headquarters here, and KV's Tata Group is the largest Indian investor in Singapore with over 3,000 employees. To some extent, Singapore is a natural extension for Indian companies and business families. Many Indian companies hold their regional assets, run their regional operations, and drive their regional strategy from Singapore, capitalizing on its position as a financial and trading hub. I was also very pleasantly surprised to learn that more than 80% of listed offshore bonds by Indian issuers are listed in the Singapore Stock Exchange. I wasn't aware of that. It was almost 80%. So many Indian companies use Singapore as a base to internationalize their business, particularly in Southeast Asia, which has a population of more than 600 million people and has a rapidly growing middle class. Singapore's strong physical and business connectivity with the region is an important advantage. The strong bench of people who understand the region is also another big plus. Just like India, Southeast Asia is also very diverse. Examples of Indian companies who use Singapore as such a base include Flipkart, Zilingo, and LiveSpace. Singapore on its own, although small in size, is quite an interesting market for many companies. This is because Singapore companies are generally early adopters of technology, and it has one of the densest concentration of multinational corporations anywhere in the world. And for many of these MNCs, Singapore serves as a regional headquarters. Hence, for many Indian IT service companies and B2B software companies, Singapore can be a very attractive place not only to win in-country projects, but also to gain entry into the leading multinational corporations as well as serve regional projects. So it makes a lot of sense to have a strong marketing and product development outfit here. And again, examples of Indian companies who have been in Singapore for these reasons include IT services companies such as TCL, HCL, Infosys, Wipro, which use Singapore as their APAC or Southeast Asia headquarter. More recent entrants include Freshworks, which is a provider of B2B cloud-based business software, Deskera, Crayon Data, which is in big data and AI, all the areas that the High Commissioner talked about. We also have Strides Pharma, which uses Singapore as an IHQ and manufacturing base, as an international headquarter and manufacturing base. So there's definitely potential for more Indian companies to use Singapore as a base to internationalize and win business from the large base of MNCs located here. Now, another area in the tech space where we see strong synergy between India and Singapore and where we have made good progress is fintech. High Commissioner talked about that. G2G interaction on fintech was institutionalized through a joint working group on fintech. And last November, our leaders launched the what they call EPICS, Application Program Interface Exchange, enabling Indian fintech companies and institutions access to ASEAN. So Indian fintech players can thus better leverage Singapore's position as an established financial hub to penetrate the regional market. Now, beyond HQs with oversight in business development, sales, and marketing, there's also scope for Indian companies to explore building their product engineering and development teams in Singapore and build products for regional markets. So this also extends into user experience and user interface, where we believe companies can consider tapping on Singapore's understanding of the region to build these key differentiators. So while Indian companies generally recognize the strengths of Singapore as a trading, financial, and services hub, there's one area which I believe many Indian companies are not aware of, and where there's a huge information and opportunity gap, and that is manufacturing. It is not known to many that Singapore has a very strong manufacturing sector, accounting for about 20% of our GDP. Singapore is also rated amongst the most competitive economies in the world. So you do get good value for money for the right activities in manufacturing. Sometimes I call this the best kept secret, and sometimes we are victims of our own good planning, because when you land in Changi Airport and you take a drive to the Central Business District or Orchard Road, you look on the left, you see trees and golf courses. You look on the right, you see trees and golf courses. And then suddenly you have all the skyscrapers. You don't see much industry. So sometimes people go away with the perception that, you know, Singapore is all about services, good quality of life and all that. But we really built some very solid things. And that's why I wanted to highlight this in particular, because it's a common misperception that people have. Now, Singapore has global leadership positions in semiconductors. We have got a very strong semiconductor cluster. We make some of the most sophisticated semiconductor chips. We have got very strong IC design capabilities, as well as semiconductor equipment manufacturing. We have the leading biomedical sciences companies manufacturing and doing R&D in Singapore. And we've got a very elaborate biomedical R&D infrastructure. We have got perhaps one of the most integrated petrochemical refinery and petrochemical complexes in the world, in a place called Jurong Island. So it's a huge complex where people buy and sell over the fence. So a huge petrochemical industry. We are the biggest aerospace maintenance, repair, overhaul hub in Asia. And we have several other examples. So you will find companies like Rolls-Royce manufacturing aircraft engines here. The only location in Asia where aircraft engines for wide-bodied planes are manufactured. I mentioned Applied Materials. They make the most sophisticated semiconductor equipment, and many other examples. The point is that Singapore is a very good place for manufacturing high-end products. And we have a very strong bias towards science and technology. Every cohort entering the education system, more than 50% of them come out with a science or engineering-based qualification across the continuum, not only engineers, but also technicians and craftsmen. So you have the whole continuum addressed. Engineers are great, but not everything is done by engineers, right? And just as a few other touch points, recently we developed a smart industry readiness index, just like Siri, yeah? Same acronym as Siri. And this is the first time any country in the world has done this. And this is because we are so serious about moving towards high-end manufacturing. And then we work with companies to see how they can improve their manufacturing operations to be Industry 4.0 ready. And we will also be hosting, we have already hosted the leading manufacturing technology show in Singapore. And that is in cooperation with the Germans, Hanover Messe, which is the biggest, by far the biggest industrial show anywhere in the world. So I just wanted to highlight these examples because, as I mentioned earlier, not many people are aware of this. So to the audience and our Indian friends listening, do give Singapore a thought when you're looking at carrying out high-end manufacturing and where it can complement your Indian activities. We have invested quite a lot in R&D in those areas that we have identified. And in Singapore, the research institutes are encouraged very strongly. In fact, they are pushed to work together with industry. And Singapore's small size then becomes a huge advantage. We don't like to call ourselves small, we call ourselves compact, meaning you can do a lot of things. You can work with diverse research institutes, all located, within a small radius. And that can be very productive because a lot of invention finds place where technologies overlap. So that's what we see many multinational companies are doing, many local companies are doing. And something for some of our Indian companies who are looking at enhancing their manufacturing technology as Make in India gains steam, that we should also look at complementarity at this from that perspective. Okay, let me finally just spend 1 or 2 minutes to talk about the ideas that I see now coming because of post-COVID. I think COVID is one thing. The other thing, of course, that all of us are noticing is the level of conflict that is unfortunately increasing in the world, especially the conflict between the US and China. None of us likes it, but it is what it is. Hopefully it goes away. But in this conflict-ridden world, I think there's even more reason for like-minded countries and companies to work together. And I think we should also look at it, in addition from the COVID lens, also from this other lens. And again, given the love relationship that Singapore and India have, I think we can look at several areas. As High Commissioner mentioned, one of the key things is, of course, supply chain. Very clearly, both because of COVID and because of this conflict, companies are looking at setting up separate supply chains out of China. I think China will continue to be very important because it's almost impossible to replicate what they have. But just as a means of risk management, people are looking at developing supply chains elsewhere. And Southeast Asia, as I mentioned, with over 600 million population, is a relatively good alternative, both as a source of supply chain as well as a market. So Singapore being in the, right in the middle of Southeast Asia, I think will play an important role in this. So in addition, of course, to looking at alternate supply chains, what we are also noticing is that, companies, including multinational corporations, looking at setting up procurement offices here, right? So I think for Indian companies that want to reach out to good customers and also offer their products as alternate supply chain, possibilities, would do well to consider having offices here, because I think it is, I'm sure some people will also set up in India, but if somebody wants to serve the region, then Singapore is probably the best alternative they look for. Now, in the same way, it's also about creating supply chains in India. So we as Capital Land, we also run an industrial park in India. We've got quite a big one in Chennai. And we are seeing growing interest from companies, in particular the Japanese, Taiwanese companies, to actually move manufacturing there, right? They are beginning to look at this seriously, and I think India can then also benefit from that if we continue to grow along that path. So supply chains, digitalization, I think we have talked about it, but really, COVID has accelerated the drive towards digitalization. So more companies, including the MNCs based here, are going to embark on significant digitalization projects, and I think that's where Indian companies are well based to serve these customers as they accelerate their digitalization plans. I think the High Commissioner already talked about the the card in the fintech area, so I won't touch on it. Sustainability is another very important point. Finally, agri-technology and food, because Singapore has plans to have 30% of local food production by 2030, which is a very ambitious objective. And there too, I think India has lots to contribute. So that's another area we should look at, which may not be so obvious. Okay, I'll stop for now. Sorry for overrunning. Thank you very much. We can't hear you. You are muted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very exhaustive coverage of the space, and in your characteristic humor, went through extremely well. As they always say, you talked about Indian side. If anyone goes to a place early, he occupies a lot of the space of the thought process as well. And as we move, Mano has covered a whole lot. So I think it makes easier for the next panelists to touch and exemplify areas which I think we could look at from their perspectives and their lenses. I'll request Amit to come on board. I just want to request we keep it to about 7 minutes, as I believe the same panel linkage will be used by the next set of panelists coming. So I appreciate if we can keep to that time. And Amit, over to you. And you have a very unique vantage position of being in DBS, looking at both clients' businesses and your own between India and Singapore and what's happening here. So you're a resident here. Your thoughts will be most welcome.
Thank you, KV, and thank you, Gagi, for introduction. And pleasure meeting you virtually, His Excellency High Commissioner Mr. Kumaran. I would say a lot of points which Mr. Kiatani mentioned are something which I do for a living. So I won't go there again, but I'll briefly cover that. So for my background, I run the telecom, media, tech, corporate investment banking business at DBS for the whole group. I also look after the offshore India business. And I sit on the South Asia Business Group as a part of Singapore Business Federation. The key objective of that group essentially is to promote business between Singapore and India. It's a bit of history on DBS. DBS again started in India more than 25 years back. In fact, the first foray was a rep office in 1994, and then converted to full branch. DBS was a beneficiary of SICA. We had 12 branches, which last year in 2019, we converted into a wholly owned subsidiary. So DBS is the only foreign bank which took advantage of India's opening up for a wholly owned subsidiary license. It's a testimony to the fact that it's a very important market for DBS. For all the reasons which Mr. Kiatani mentioned, we see this as a two-way flow, not just Singapore companies, but companies in the region. So a bit of background, DBS has 6 core markets: Singapore, Hong Kong, India, China, Indonesia, Taiwan. So a lot of Chinese companies, Taiwanese companies, companies based out of Hong Kong, Indonesia. We want to be a conduit for them as they go into India. And we have been a thick of it as we see dislocation of supply chain. In fact, as a part of my coverage, telecom media tech, I am seeing it very closely with a lot of these companies deciding where to shift supply chain. And essentially, there are few options: either Southeast Asia, which is Vietnam, some in Malaysia, Philippines, or go to India, or expand further in Taiwan. And we're in a unique position where we're working on both sides, trying to see how we could get large global MNC companies. They all have head offices or sales office or regional offices in Singapore, going to India, or using Singapore as a base to go to Southeast Asia. That has been a big part of our business, not just from a financing perspective, also helping them on the entire trade flow, the receivable financing, supply chain financing. That's kind of one part of business. A little bit touching base on India. India was a test bed for DBS, where we launched our first DigiBank in 2016. In last 4 years, now we have 2.5 million customers. It was a complete app-only mobile banking using Aadhaar as a base, where you could have a bank account up and running in 90 seconds. And we used that example of experience we learned in India to launch in other markets. Similarly, what we're doing right now is we're experimenting with some of the other stuff in other markets, like Indonesia, with respect to complete end-to-end digital supply chain financing, complete paperless, fully integrated with suppliers, merchant, using data as a tool. Some of the stuff that High Commission touch upon, IoT, data analytics, AI, we're using that now to start offering similar financing services to small, medium enterprises in India. So for us, it's kind of trying to get experience on different market and bring it back to the two markets together. Now, as my remit for the India desk business, we have seen a lot of Indian companies coming to Singapore for opening offices to cover the region. We work very closely with them, including working with KV in his, another hat as a president director of Tata Sons, trying to see how we could help them grow in the region, help them fundraise in the region, use Singapore as a procurement hub, as a sourcing hub, and a financing hub. That's a big part of our business, and I would say I'm very pleased to say that over the last 5 years I'm doing this role of India desk, we have seen multiple companies come here, use this as a platform to expand business in the region or outside region. As expand business, they also use as a source for financing. You touch upon very important part about 80% companies or debt bonds listed in Singapore. So that's only one part of the fact story. The bigger part of the story is investors are increasingly in the region, Singapore, Hong Kong, rest of the region, are investing in Indian companies via Singapore. These are a combination of both institutional investors and private banking investors. So we become a conduit where we allow these investors to access India credit or Indian bonds via Singapore, which eventually get listed in Singapore. So Singapore has become now 4th largest wealth management hub globally. And this is a part of parcel of the whole process that you describe. What you describe as an outcome, the journey here really is a big place where a lot of companies, investors are investing in India via Singapore. So some of these players are really places where we play a very important role. We see as India is a very important market and try to see how we could hold hand for companies in the region, in Singapore, to invest in India and vice versa. See how we could get Indian companies when they come here to grow in the region. So in the interest of time, I'll pause here. I know I have other panelists to follow me as well. Again, thank you very much and pleasure meeting you, all of you virtually. KB, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Amit. There was a very quick overview of the sector in which you are and what opportunities it holds. I have Sanjeev as the next speaker. Sanjeev, very much appreciate if you can, sharpshoot on what the 2-3 things that we can do between India and Singapore in your sector in the coming couple of years post-COVID. So getting a little more sharpshooting of the pointers.
Sure. Thanks, KV. Thank you very much. So I think what I thought it would be worth highlighting is our own experience in India, given that this is our 26th year of doing business there. Ascendus India Trust itself is in its 12th year of its existence. So we've, in a sense, experienced various business economic cycles, various governments in the center, in the state. And I think, firstly, I wanted to make the point that if you look at directionally on the government and the regulation, I would say that we've seen, especially I'd say in the last 5-6 years, significant improvement. A lot of the FDI norms have been relaxed. One also finds it's a lot more easy to get access to government officials, bureaucrats, etc. in India, which has in the past at times been a challenge, even when one had a very legitimate reason to go and have a discussion on a specific business issue. And in fact, I would also say that the High Commissioner, Mr. Javed Ashraf, has personally also been very proactive in engaging with business and has helped us resolve some very significant tax issues that we were facing a few years ago. So I think that just in a sense is just a reflection of the improvement in the way foreign investors and businesses in particular, the quality of engagement. Is it all good? No. I mean, I think that the challenge is always in India, not so much at the center, it's also at the states. So different states have very different experiences. In the southern states, we've had Industrial Corporation of Karnataka, Industrial Corporation of Tamil Nadu as partners, which have worked very well. There are certain other states where we've had challenges. So I think, but directionally, definitely, we are comfortable enough that today we have $2.5 billion invested, and as at AI Trust is roughly about 80% of what Ascendus and Capital Land do in India, and in fact, it's been growing very rapidly. Our investors who are global, primarily from the US, we've got the likes of BlackRock, Fidelity, Vanguard, all as our shareholders on the AIT register, who have been investing with us because of the growth they have seen on the IT park side of the business. So coming to COVID in particular, I must say that one of the things which has been a great learning for me personally, as well as we've navigated the last 4 months, has been, I mean, our 3 principal businesses, or currently actually 2, I would say, which is IT parks and logistics. So I think we were definitely, like everybody else, going through a lot of soul searching on what will be the outlook for IT parks. And we're still going through that soul searching process, partly because of work from home, but more fundamentally, is this IT services business model going to be questioned in the post-COVID world? So I must say that if one looks at our tenants who we engage with very frequently, if you look at the numbers, in fact, of TCS itself, even talking to the Accentures and the Capgeminis of the world, India is truly winning the majority of the work which is emanating out of digital transformation. There is a tremendous amount of growth in new business contract wins, surprisingly through COVID. Because whether it's a bank who now needs to engage digitally with its customers, whether it is cybersecurity to enable work from home, all of that is actually accelerating the pace of IT work into India. So we believe that therefore the business model of IT parks will, even if there's some setback in the near term, remain quite relevant. Logistics, of course, e-commerce penetration has, like many other countries in India, accelerated because of COVID, and our industrial and logistics business is benefiting from that. I'm also happy to say that Apple's recent announcement about manufacturing smartphones in India has also already started getting reflected as we experience demand from a component manufacturer of iPhones who wants to take up space with us in our industrial park. So I think while COVID presents challenges on many fronts, but I think it also presents some certain very significant opportunities where I think India is very well positioned to participate.
Thank you. Thanks, Sanjeev. That's some good light at the end of the tunnel in terms of opportunities for the real estate with the change of the post-COVID world. That was very interesting to hear. We have two more panelists to speak and some time kept for concluding remarks. So we will look at how we can get time. And I've got Omar here. Omar, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Rao. I'd like to very quickly thank the organizers for inviting me to this very august panel. I'd like to congratulate CII in particular for hosting a very well-received business summit. I run a company called Manohar, which designs, engineers, and project manages infrastructure and built environment projects. We have been operating in India for more than 20 years. Some of the projects which we're very proud to have been involved in include the Statue of Unity, the Delhi New Airport, and a variety of infrastructure and real estate projects. On a personal note, I'd like to say that while Singaporeans are welcome in most parts of the world, the welcome, the respect, the adulation, I would say, the familiarity that Indian companies, government agencies have for Singapore is really unmatchable. And so whilst the relationship between our two countries is solid, I think there's always potential to do a lot more. One of the areas where I really think there is potential for both Singapore and India to collaborate more closely is really infrastructure and smart cities. And clearly these are two key sectors that India has also earmarked for its own development. It's commonly accepted that tackling the infrastructure deficit in India is a key to unlocking its growth potential. To sustain long-term growth rates in India, 8-10%, infrastructure spending has to grow much faster. Currently in India, the infrastructure spending is about $100 billion per annum, but it really needs to at least double. I've read reports that India is looking at spending something like $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion over the next 5 years. Whilst infrastructure is historically funded largely by the government and G2G arrangements, quite clearly, private sector also needs to be mobilized to invest, especially in more bankable projects. Now, how can Singapore help? First of all, Singapore is ranked as the leading country in the world in terms of not just having the right type of infrastructure, but also how it's operated and how efficiently it's operated. We're also ranked as a formidable smart nation in our own right. So while Singapore is a financial hub with deep equity and credit markets, but quite frankly, we also have a very deeply entrenched, deeply developed ecosystem of players that can provide infrastructure services and capital. And maybe I think there is an opportunity for Singapore companies to set up a consortium to design, build, finance, and operate bankable projects. And conditions can be made so that more infrastructure projects are bankable. Second point is expertise. In India, it's known that many infrastructure projects are delayed or have serious cost overruns. I believe a project which is well designed, well planned, can make a big difference and can save 10 to 20% of its construction cost through value engineering and by making the construction more buildable, saving construction time. These differences make projects from being unbankable to being much more bankable. Thirdly, smart cities, which is a big initiative of the Indian government, really relies on technology and the interplay of selecting the right technology, which has resilience, scalability, can make a big difference. We in Singapore have tremendous experience in this regard. We live in a post-COVID world, so it would be wrong for me not to mention something about COVID and how perhaps engineering can make a difference in tackling COVID-19, but also future pandemics, especially those that are transmissible by air. I think two aspects. One, good space planning and having the flexibility to repurpose facilities obviously will be an important tool. And number two, modifications to mechanical systems, in particular air conditioning systems, can make a big difference in terms of reducing the spread of bacteria and pathogens by purifying the air and managing airflows. Again, we in Singapore, because we've had the experience of dealing with SARS and because we live in a dense built environment, we have quite a lot of experience in this regard. Last but not least, I think the Singapore-India relationship should not be defined by what the two countries can offer, but also use it as a platform, as a springboard to venturing into ASEAN, but for Singapore companies to go beyond India into countries like Middle East and Africa, where India has fantastic connectivity and experience. So thank you very much, Mr. Rao.
Thank you. Thank you, Omar. It's a good coverage of the space in which you're operating. And the last one was particularly interesting about how we can prepare for the post-COVID world. Anupam, you have a different flip over Amit because you lead one of India's top banks in Singapore and a lot of clientele from India. How do you see going forward in terms of what could be done? And I'm afraid we have about 7 minutes more to go before we have to sign out. And I'm told to request all panelists to stay back if you would like to join the next session, which is on the changing landscape of the supply chains, which we talked about. And I request all the members who are currently attending this as our audience to also stay on. With that, Anupam, over to you.
Good afternoon, High Commissioner, Mr. Rao. Good afternoon to all of you. The mandate of the bank in Singapore is to actually contribute in expanding the Singapore-India corridor for investment, trade, and remittances. Our clients in the region include Indian corporates, NRIs, as well as global regional and Singaporean companies and funds, which have presence in India. Well, if you are the last speaker on the panel, one may feel that some key things have been very well articulated. But having said that, I would like to talk about, as Mr. Rao said, an Indian bank's perspective of how we see the corridor expanding, since I meet a lot of clients and stakeholders here as part of my day job. In the past, Indian companies have set up offices in Singapore for handling their imports or exports, or some Indian groups have set up their holding companies here for debt raising. What we see now, and this trend will accelerate post-COVID, is the new age digital Indian companies, including Indian unicorns, setting up their holding companies here for either raising venture capital or private equity, or also some of them using Singapore as a base for their international operations to expand in Southeast Asia or larger Asia Pacific region. I'm told almost 25 to 30% of Indian startups have their offices in Singapore. Udaan, Inmobi, Preto, Ola are some of the examples. On the other hand, there are more than 400 Singaporean companies which are operating in India. In the past, the sectors where the investments have happened, we talked about it, real estate, logistics, ports, power, food and agri-telecom. While these investments will continue, post-COVID, I see accelerated partnership in the following areas. One is fintech. When I meet a lot of Singaporean fintechs in the area of payments, digital lending, wealth management, data analytics, robotics process automation, they are very keen to enter Indian markets once they reach scale with the proof of concept. We talked about semiconductors and hard drive. Some Singaporean companies are looking at exploring India as part of their supply chain to diversify. Another interesting area is electric mobility. I think electric vehicle market is likely to grow exponentially in India, and Singaporean companies are keen to partner with India on battery, charging infrastructure, and a lot of other key areas. Cloud, we talked about it briefly. As the cloud usage across individual and businesses increase, investment in data centers by Singaporean companies will also grow. I think circular economy is another area where Singapore has tremendous, expertise, and I see collaboration there. Last but not the least, Indian digital economy is growing, well beyond expectation during COVID times. As a result, I think investment in startups in the area of e-commerce, telemedicine, enterprise solutions, gaming is likely to grow. And I think Sanjeev talked about warehousing. I think warehousing linked to e-commerce would be another area where we will see interest, from Singaporean companies. As far as trade is concerned, while the trade of energy and agri-commodities will continue, but I feel the trade will mirror the growth of digital economy with a share of electrical and electronics components, network equipment, semiconductors, etc. rising. And on top of that, I think there'll be focus on digitization and leveraging new technologies like blockchain for efficiency and effectiveness. In fact, NTP, which is a network trade platform by Singapore, is a strong step in digitizing trade ecosystem. So I believe that the new normal leading to the acceleration of digital economy would accelerate the pace of collaboration between the two countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anupam. That was a nice new perspective about a sector we have actually not spent much time discussing. Thanks for bringing that into play today. And that holds tremendous promise. Thanks for the cooperation of all our panelists to keep it brief. We've got a couple of minutes to do a quick final round robin of comments from each one of you, a minute or so to conclude. If there are any conclusive comments to make. Mano, you have anything to say about overall future?
I really feel very guilty for overrunning my time.
No problem.
No, I just wanted to say that the opportunities are tremendous. Let's also look at those things that are not so obvious. So I talked a little bit about Indian companies looking at R&D and manufacturing in Singapore as the possible blind spots. And similarly, I think there are a lot of opportunities in India which Singapore companies are not exploiting. So I would say at the next phase of our love affair, we should be looking at those things. And I think both countries are really open for business. That's all I wanted to say. And thank the organizers again. Thank you very much, KV. Yeah.
Any other comments from other people?
Hi, KV, can you hear me?
Yes.
No, I think there are a lot of, yeah. So I would say post two things, post-COVID and post-geopolitical situation with where we stand today with US-China. I would say Singapore-India relations hold very important. I mean, it's even more important in today's day and age, both from technological development and geopolitical situation, supply chain shifting, move of cloud, data center. So I think to me, it holds positive for both Singapore and India. Thank you.
Thank you. High Commissioner, would you have something to say or?
Well, thank you very much to the panelists. I think it was a very exciting set of inputs. Having come here very recently, certainly a lot of interesting ideas to pursue in the next 3 years that I'll be here. I'm sorry I missed out recognizing Mr. Anupam Varma at the beginning. The list that was available with me did not have a later addition, Mr. Varma. My apologies, but really a pleasure to listen to all of you. Thank you very much. Look forward to staying in touch with you and working with you individually and collectively in coming months and years.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your time and panelists. My last concluding comment will be this is just the beginning of a dialogue. And as companies and corporations do, we need to get into a brainstorm session where we can think out of the box and get everybody together at different platforms to think, what are those things that we need to identify? There was a nice comment that came in the comments part that post-COVID, there should be a lot more exchange, even on the healthcare side and on disease management and how we can exchange information. There are a lot of good ideas coming up. I suppose this is just the beginning of a new dialogue for a new pathway of engagements between the countries. And with that, let me thank the organizers for this opportunity. And I reinforce their invitation to all of you to stay back if you wish to continue on the next session, which is on logistics and how supply chains are changing. All the attendees are requested to stay back on behalf of CII, and thank you very much.